Welcome everyone to episode 6 of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me as always is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby is sitting across from me in the studio. He looks like he's ready to talk true crime.
True crime all the time, buddy.
We could talk it all the time.
That's right.
We're doing D.B. Cooper today, and I think you know this is one of my favorite stories, cases.
Yeah, you always love this one.
Now, it's not the Zodiac. That by far is my favorite unsolved case. And I know we're going to get to that. That's going to be a doozy. So I think, Gib, one thing that's strange is, we're always talking about these macabre cases and almost usually somebody's dead, right?
Yeah,
and in
absolutely.
some cases, many people are dead.
Right.
And here's a case where nobody died. We don't have to talk about any gruesome details or any murders.
But still intriguing.
Oh, it's a very intriguing, fascinating mystery while also being a crime. I mean, it is, by definition, it was crime. But I don't know, there's just something about this case that it grabbed me from, when I was younger.
It fascinated me too.
So I think what I want to do first, Gibbs, is to help kind of set the mood for this story is I got to play a clip right off. And I think it really helps set us up.
When he got on a plane in Portland, Oregon last night, he was just another passenger who gave his name as D.A. Cooper. But today, after hijacking a Northwest Airlines jet, ransoming the passengers in Seattle, then making a getaway by parachute somewhere between there and Reno, Nevada, the description on one wire service, master criminal.
You got to like Cronkite.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that takes you back.
Old school.
That is old school. There's gonna be a lot of people that get some nostalgia from that. And then there's going to be some younger people saying, who the hell is that?
Yeah.
that you're playing?
Don't
But,
know.
Either way, it kind of sets the mood both for for the time period, right? We're talking about 1971. There's going to be a lot of our listeners that
Weren't even born.
exactly
Yeah.
weren't even born. But there again, I mean, this is a case that really holds up because of the intrigue, right? The case is what it is, and we're going to go through and we're going to talk through all the details, but it's really the suspects. When you start to get to the suspects and talking about, at one point there were over 1,000, and obviously we're not going to talk about 1,000, but we're going to talk about the top suspects. And what is fascinating, even to this day, you can go online and see people arguing about who D.B. Cooper was.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And you'll have a lot of people that say, no, I know it was this guy, and it'll be one of the guys we're going to talk about. And right on the message board or whatever you call it, it'll say, no, it's this guy.
It's
and
this other guy.
yeah, here's the reason why. All right. So let's start with the hijacking,
Okay,
right?
right.
So Walter set it up for us. So we're talking about Thanksgiving Eve, 1971. A man has a black briefcase, and he's at the Portland International Airport. He purchases a one-way ticket on Flight 305 and says that his name is Dan Cooper. Now, keep in mind, Gibbs, he's going to Seattle.
Okay.
Portland to Seattle is not very far.
Yeah, it's got to be a pretty short trip,
Yeah,
right?
it's back then, they said it was a 30-minute trip.
So as soon as you reach altitude, you're coming back down.
If you even get to altitude, I don't know. So the aircraft that he boards is a 727, and he takes a seat in the rear of the cabin. He lights a cigarette because back then in 1971, if
You could smoke on
you could
planes.
smoke.
Yeah.
What scares me today is that every now and then you'll get on a plane and you'll still have the little spot
ashtray
on your armrest that they've just like soldered it or something
Right.
closed.
Tells you how old that plane is.
Yeah, that scares me a little bit because
Me too.
if we're going that high and that fast, that tells you how old the plane is. So like I said, he lights a cigarette, he orders a drink, And all of the passengers or the people would describe him as a man in his mid 40s, between 5'10", 6 foot, somewhere around, somewhere along those lines. He had on a black raincoat, a dark suit, and a white collared shirt, and a black necktie with a mother of pearl tie pin.
Okay.
Now that's kind of important because it comes into play
Down the road.
a little bit. So the flight takes off, and it's not very long, right, into the flight that DB Cooper hands a note to the flight attendant that is sitting pretty close to him, I think, in the back in one of those jump seats.
Okay.
And the flight attendant's name is Florence Schaffner.
So does she open the note and reads it, or?
No, she actually doesn't.
Oh.
And that's, I think, and maybe because she's used to being probably hit on
Okay.
nonstop, day in, day out.
She thinks someone passing her, here's my numbers.
Yeah. And she actually just drops it unopened into her purse.
Wow.
And he has to actually say to her, ma'am, you better look at this note. I've got a bomb.
Oh.
And that's where
That's where it gets serious.
that's where things start to get, a little serious. Now, one thing to me that's always been interesting is he takes the note back at some point. So nobody ever actually recovered the note. So the exact wording has never been known.
Right. It's not 100% accurate.
But by all accounts, the note was printed in all capitals with a felt tip pen.
So what did this note say?
He had a bomb.
Just, I've got a bomb.
He had a bomb in his briefcase, and he wanted the flight attendant to sit with him. And she does.
Okay.
She sits down next to him, and she asks to see the bomb, which, I don't know, crazy, not crazy.
I guess I'd want to see it too.
Would you?
Yeah. What else are you going to do? 10,000, 20,000? I don't know how many thousand feet up
Well,
in the
that's
air you are.
true. But he opens the briefcase a little bit, just long enough for her to, get a quick glimpse of what appears to be something like dynamite, right? Like some red cylinders that probably look like sticks of dynamite,
Okay.
and attached to some wires and with a battery. So she's seeing something that looks like a bomb. And he closes the briefcase, and that's when he says, "This is what I want." And he demands $200,000.
It's a lot of money.
In 1971, that was a good chunk of change. So the other thing he wants is 4 parachutes, and he specifies this: 2 primary, 2 reserve. The other thing he asked for was a fuel truck to be standing on the tarmac so that when they landed in Seattle, they could refuel.
Okay.
And the stewardess went up to the pilots in the cockpit, and she conveyed all the messages that Cooper had given her. And then when she returned, she noticed that he was wearing sunglasses, which he hadn't been before, apparently.
Wonder why. That's
don't know.
interesting. This
Yeah.
is something strange to do.
Well, it is strange. I mean, she has seen him, but maybe...
Oh, because the other passengers at this point, haven't recognized him.
Right, he hasn't caused a scene or anything, so maybe
Right.
he figured...
Additional disguise.
Yeah, that would be an additional layer of disguise. But now the pilots, I mean, they know, right, that they've got a guy on board that has a bomb. He's threatening to blow up the plane if he doesn't get what he wants.
Okay.
So they contact Seattle, tell them what's going on, and the federal authorities are alerted.
Okay. So the Seattle airport knows, the FAA knows.
I assume local police probably
Local
knows,
police.
but the feds know, the FBI knows.
FBI are aware.
Now, one thing that the pilots have to do is they have to tell the passengers something. because they have to delay the flight, or they have to delay the landing. There's only like 36 people on this plane, passengers.
Yeah.
But they tell them that the flight is going to be delayed because there's a minor mechanical difficulty. And this gives time for Northwest Orient, which is the company that owns the plane.
Okay.
It gives time for them to figure out what the hell they're going to do. And what they do is they authorize payment of this ransom money, and they tell the pilots to cooperate, do whatever this guy wants. So they're going to give him the $200,000. And basically they circle around for a couple hours to give enough time to, number one, make the decision, but also for them to, the police and FBI, to get in place and assemble the parachutes and everything else.
Well, I think they needed time. From what I understand, they also needed time with the ransom money. They needed to go through and jot all the serial numbers down.
Yeah, that would make total sense.
So they had I forget how many hundreds of people trying to
write
all these numbers down as fast as they could, so they'd be able to track them at a later date.
Yeah, and we know they did, because that comes into play
down the road.
Down the road,
yeah.
As some money is found, that's the only way they could have known
that it was tied to this.
Yes. So you're right. I mean, they had to have done that. Now, the FBI agents, they got the ransom money from several different banks around Seattle. And the way they paid it was using 10,000 $20 bills.
Yeah.
And then what they did is they made a microfilm photograph of each of them.
10,000 bills.
Yes.
Someone stood there and took a snapshot. I guess I don't know how microfilm worked back in the day, but...
Well, I don't know, but somehow they took a photograph of it.
That's crazy.
But no matter what you're doing, if you're doing it 10,000 times...
That's a lot.
Yeah. Now, we had thought maybe they were writing the numbers.
Right.
Which would have taken a lot of time. But even taking 10,000 photographs, you're going to need to...
That's a process, man.
Yeah, and that's part of why they had to fly around.
Right.
Now, originally, they tried to give Cooper some military parachutes.
Okay.
Out of a local Air Force base. But he rejected them, and instead he demanded some more regular civilian-type parachutes that had manually operated ripcords versus, I guess on the government, what would be like, would it be an automatic?
So I'm guessing he wanted to control when he pulled the ripcord.
Yes. And so they ended up getting them from a local skydiving school. We said in the beginning, Mike, that the plane took off at 2:50, and it's 5:39 when the plane lands in Seattle. So once they land, Cooper, he tells the pilot, he's starting to take over, right? And he's telling the pilots what to do. Mm-hmm. And he has them taxi the plane down this kind of isolated part of the tarmac, right? Where the planes land.
Right.
And tells them to turn off all the lights. He doesn't want any snipers being able to take a shot at him. And one of the operations managers from the airplane company, he approaches the plane in street clothes, and he delivers the cash in some type of, it wasn't like a real like duffel bag. What I saw was more like a sack.
Okay.
So they weren't making it easy on him by giving him something nice with a zipper.
Something easy to transport it.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. I think they did that on purpose. And they also gave the parachutes, and they gave them to one of the stewardesses on there. Her last name was Mucklow. And, you know, when you go online, you can see some interviews with her from back in the day. So they did all of this through the back stairs, right at the back of the plane. And then what happens is, as soon as he gets what he wants, he lets all the passengers go. he lets Schaffner, who was the original stewardess,
The one that he gave the note to?
the one he gave the note to,
Okay.
and he lets another senior flight attendant leave the plane. So at this point, I know Mucklow is still on there, and we know that the pilots are still on there. The pilot, co-pilot, however many there were. But I think that's about it. He lets almost everybody go. And he proceeds, while they're refueling the plane, to talk to the crew about what his plan is. And he wants them to take a course towards Mexico City. And he wants them to be at an airspeed that's the slowest they can go without stalling out the plane. It was somewhere around 120 miles an hour.
Sounds pretty slow.
For an airplane, it sounds pretty slow to me.
Yeah.
The other thing that Cooper does is he wants the landing gear to stay he wants it down the whole time. And he wants the wing flaps even at a certain degrees. So, I mean, right now he's pretty calculating. The other big thing he does is he wants the cabin to be unpressurized, right? Obviously, with the cabin unpressurized, you can open a door. So a door, or as we know, he's going to lower the stairs. That's how he's going to make his exit.
Because that was the unique thing about this aircraft.
That it had these aft stairs,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So at this point, they think he's going to Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And they're even to the point where they're telling him, hey, this thing can't make it farther than 1,000 miles. So they agree that they need to stop in Reno, Nevada to refuel before making it on to Mexico. Big point, but I think his last thing was he wanted to take off with the rear staircase deployed. And you talked about how that was kind of the 727 was an aircraft that had this kind of staircase that you could walk right up from the ground.
Right.
Now the pilots weren't having it, right? They said it wasn't safe, and they argued about that a little bit. And finally he said, it doesn't matter. He just figured he would lower it himself once they got in the air. So I want to play a clip of, there was 2 passengers that I found a clip of that were on the plane at the time and ultimately, obviously, released.
Of course, after 2 hours in the air, I felt an urge to go back to the men's restroom and got up and walked down the aisle and noticed the expression of the stewardess. She was rather horrified. She glanced first at me walking up the aisle, and then at B.B. Cooper and at the handbag by his side, and then back at me again as if, why are you doing what you're doing? But as I walked past her into the men's room, he turned around and looked very intently at me, and I got a pretty good look. I thought it rather strange that he was that interested in me. And so I got a pretty good impression of him. He was very alert and very much in command of the situation. He knew what was going on, and he was watching carefully every move of every passenger.
We finally did land. We landed way off in the far end of the field, which I felt was just a way that showed that he had engineered things so that there was just no possible thing that could have gotten in his way. He allowed the passengers to be unloaded, but kept them grouped out on the airport for close to 45 minutes in the wind and the cold and the rain. And a car met the airplane with the parachute and the money, and we were rumored that was there. And but none of us were allowed to leave until that had all taken place, and then we were allowed slowly to walk across the airfield.
Pretty interesting. Couple of passengers, their experience, and obviously, like we talked about at this point, he's gotten everything he wanted. He's got the money. He's got the parachutes. He's let all of the passengers go most of the crew. At this point, all he has is, I think, the pilots and one stewardess or flight attendant, and they take off. They're refueled and they take off.
So there's 5 people left on there, right?
Yeah, give or take.
2 flight attendants, and I think there's the pilot and the flight engineer.
Yeah, and a co-pilot maybe.
Yeah.
So I don't know, 4 or 5 people at least.
So at this point, they're up in the air, and
Yeah.
they're making their track to, I guess, headed to Reno, because this is where they said they needed to go to refuel before they can go Mexico City.
Yes.
Meanwhile, the feds, they go ahead and dispatch 2 fighter jets from a nearby Air Force base. They can't see the details of the plane. They can't get close enough because of the weather. They can't see if someone was going to jump off, they wouldn't be able to know it.
Well, and that's one thing we haven't talked about. I mean, the weather that night was not good.
No.
And we did talk about they're flying very slowly. I don't know how slow a fighter jet can go compared to this 727. Can they slow down and match the 120 miles an hour? Maybe. I don't know.
I don't know. For some reason, I don't think they can.
I wouldn't have thought they could.
So I'm wondering if they just have to, kind of loop around every now and then and take a peek and see what's going on with the plane. But I'm sure we have listeners that will let us know.
Yeah, we do like that.
Oh, I do.
And they do. They let us know.
Yeah, I like it when they correct us with the correct information like that.
So after takeoff, one of the things that happens is that DB Cooper has the remaining flight attendant go join the rest of the crew in the cockpit. So they're all up there with the door closed. He's all by himself.
Okay, he's in the back and they're in the front.
Yeah, he's all by himself. And as she's going, she observes him tying something around his waist. And then doesn't see him anymore, obviously, because she's up in the cockpit. Then all of a sudden, around 8 o'clock, this about 20 minutes into the flight, they've got a warning light that comes on in the cockpit that lets them know that the rear stairway that we talked about is has been activated. And then the next thing is they notice a change in air pressure, which indicates that the door is open.
So around 8:13, he drops the stairs in the aft.
Well, yeah, he does something. Whatever he does, it causes the plane the nose to jump upwards.
Jump up. Okay.
And very suddenly.
So it's kind of like a drag on the back of the plane.
Right.
When he does that.
When either he opens the door or puts the stairs down, whatever combination of
Sure.
that.
And that makes sense. When that stairs would drop in the middle of the back of the plane, it's going to catch that air, right? And it's going to force it to...
There's going to be a drag, which
Yeah.
is going to cause the nose
Which
to
makes sense to
pop
me.
up. That does make sense. And it's pretty significant enough that, the pilot's got to trim the plane back level.
Okay.
They're flying basically for 2 more hours till they get to Reno, and they land this 727 with that we're calling it like some set of stairs.
The aft stairs.
Aft stairs.
Yeah.
It's still deployed. They land the plane at the Reno airport. Everybody converges on the plane, right? FBI agents, sheriffs, state police, Reno police, Reno 911 is there.
Reno 911. Yeah. The guy with the tight shorts is
Yeah,
what you're thinking
he's
of.
there.
Yeah.
Because at this point, they really don't know what's going on.
No.
But it's very quickly that they search the plane and they realize that, he's not there. So I want to play a quick clip.
Police believe he left the 727 in the flatlands of Oregon or Washington, but they are still looking in 4 states, even around the airport. Authorities began their search here, thinking the hijacker may have jumped off at the end of the runway as the plane touched down. But the problem is more complex. A daring parachute escape from a flying 727 somewhere between Reno and Seattle, Washington.
There's really only one reason I wanted to play that clip. And most of the people listening will probably recognize that as Bill Curtis. That was a young Bill Curtis back when he was doing the news. You know, Bill Curtis's, for true crime fans, is a big deal with a lot of the shows that he did. Plus, I just think he has a cool voice.
Yeah.
I could sit and listen to him.
So did he have his own true crime show?
It was called American Justice.
Okay.
Yeah, I used to watch it a lot when I was a kid. You know, there was an investigation, obviously, because they realize he's not there. They do find some fingerprints, and they find that tie that we talked about.
Oh, that the pearl thing.
Right. It was a black tie with the mother of pearl tie clip.
Yeah.
And they find 2 of the 4 parachutes. One of the 2 that was left had been opened, and some of it had been cut off. Some parts of it had been cut off.
Huh.
And I think, from what I read, some of the theories is that he used part of one of those parachutes, because remember what they gave him
the satchel.
Yeah.
Okay.
What they gave him the money in wasn't really conducive for jumping out of an airplane.
Okay.
My understanding was it didn't have a zipper. And so the thought was that he took one of the spare parachutes and he made like a
homemade knapsack or something.
Yeah, made something that he could bundle up and maybe tie, and maybe that's what he was tying around him that the flight attendant saw before she.
Yeah, I was wondering what that was.
Yeah, I think that's the speculation, is that once they found one of the parachutes and it had been cut up in some fashion, that he made some kind of homemade fanny pack or whatever you want to call it, that he was able to bundle up the money and also tie it around his waist. Because remember, he's jumping out of an airplane. It was at that altitude on that night about -4 degrees.
Oh.
The initial blast. And then also he's jumping out. So
100 mile an hour wind,
120
miles an hour.
They're going 120 miles an hour. And yeah, by all accounts, it was, it wouldn't have been something that a lot of people would want to try in your normal
clothes.
Yeah. Or in your normal civilian, parachuting club.
Right.
That's not, I don't think, how they would choose to do it.
No. I'm guessing he falls pretty fast, rapidly descends once he jumps before he pulls the ripcord. So he's probably not in that temperature that long.
Yeah. I mean, as they go through the investigation, you know, I think that's one of the things that they were trying to do is define where he would have landed. I'm assuming at this point they know that he jumped out, or they believe he jumped out of this airplane.
But they're looking from Seattle to Reno.
Well, that's one of the biggest problems, is because if you remember, from the time that the warning light came on that we talked about to the time that they landed, that was about 2 hours.
Right. That's a big window.
To not know at what point did he jump out, because the door and that stairwell or whatever we're calling it was open the whole time.
Yeah.
So he could have jumped out the minute he opened it. He could have waited 30 minutes. He could have waited an hour. So that really hampers the ability to pinpoint where he would have landed.
I'm guessing he jumped out within the first 30 minutes is what I think. But again, I don't think we know, but that's what I
think it's a good speculation, because why would he wait around too long?
Right.
You know, for them to come back out, for something to happen.
Yeah. He's
probably going to do it sooner than later.
And if at that point he drops even though the pressure stabilizes, it's still, the temperature in the cabin's got to drop. So it just doesn't make sense that he would wait towards the back half of that 2 hours versus the front half, like you said. Yeah.
And they did they were able to do one experiment that they thought maybe could pinpoint it. And they dropped a 200-pound sled out of an airplane.
Yeah.
With the same configuration, flying the same speed. And based on that, when they dropped it out, that's when the the nose of the airplane went up.
Okay.
I don't know. I think you and I thought it was when he lowered the stairs.
But it was really more like when you jump off a diving board, you get that kick.
Maybe because that's the experiment that I read about. They said that it was when they pushed this 200-pound sled out of the thing, the open.
That caused the tip to come up.
Yeah.
Okay. So then that would tell us really it was towards the
very
beginning.
Yeah, the very beginning, because that was like, I think they said like 8:13.
Okay.
So based off of that, then they were able to figure out or
Assume
that he was probably somewhere in the area of Washington
Okay.
still.
Bigfoot country.
Yeah. And they were in like Ariel, Washington, near Lake Merwin. These are, all the Lewis River. These are the places that they kind of zeroed in on that maybe he might have landed.
And there's some other theories about why, right? For the dam in that area, that they thought that could have been one of the reasons, because at night the dam was all lit up and you could see it from the sky. And if you're from the area, then that would be an easy focal point for you to jump to, and you could have had a vehicle waiting there or something like that. So that was one of the rabbit holes.
They did an extensive search. They really didn't find much. The only thing of any note that I saw, Gibbs, was that there were a couple of women that found a skeleton. And it was later identified as some female teenager who had been abducted and murdered weeks before.
Really?
Yeah. So actually, I guess somebody did get murdered.
So
I
there
thought
you
we
go.
weren't going to be talking about murder, but
You got some true crime murder involved in this.
There actually was somebody murdered. It just didn't involve D.B. Cooper. This search operation that they did, lasted quite a while, because it was into 1972, and it was said that it's probably the most extensive and intensive in U.S. history. But yet they uncovered nothing in this whole time period that they're searching. They didn't find a parachute. They didn't find any significant evidence
to lead them to believe they were on the right track.
Yeah, nothing.
Yeah.
Not a bill, not a...
They have like probably hundreds of military service people.
They had all kinds
reserve.
of... Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they had National Guard. They had aerial searches done. Now, one of the things that came out later, though, is the original landing zone that they calculated really came into question, because the pilot, whose last name was Scott, we talked about him.
Yep.
He was flying the aircraft manually, and he had to fly it manually because of the specific demands of speed and altitude that Cooper wanted. I don't know how he did, but he later said that he was probably much farther east than what he had originally thought he was.
Okay. So he changed his story a little bit after he had time to think about how he was flying the plane at that time.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Gibbs. So I think we have to talk a little bit about the ransom money. As we said, the FBI had taken down all the serial numbers for all the bills that they gave in the ransom. They sent that out to all kinds of different banks and different businesses. And the Northwest Orient, which was the company that, operated the plane, they actually offered a 15% reward for any amount of money that was recovered, up to $25,000. And then a year later in 72, they actually released the serial numbers to the general public.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Put it out there for everybody.
Yeah, which, as can be expected, caused people to counterfeit $20 bills with those exact serial numbers. And in one case, these guys were actually able to take a reporter for about $30,000 in exchange for an interview.
By using false
Yeah.
documents or
Right.
counterfeit funds.
This guy, this interviewer this reporter thinks he's getting an interview with DB Cooper.
Yeah.
And I guess they paid $30,000 for this interview. And
Wow. Which is a lot of money back then.
yeah, these guys were just two guys that counterfeited some $20 bills.
Yeah.
But even with all this, right, even with the release of the serial numbers to the general public, nobody ever comes forward at this point with any money. It's not until 1980 that an 8-year-old kid who's vacationing with his family in Vancouver, Washington, he actually finds 3 packets of the ransom money.
Yeah. I've seen that.
As he's playing like on a riverbank or something. Now the bills were, and you can see pictures of the bills online, but they're like almost disintegrated, right? You can still make out the serial numbers, but they're badly decomposed. I don't know if that's the right word, but
Yeah.
deteriorated.
So that's a pretty big find in the DB Cooper case then. I mean, because up to that point, they really didn't have anything major besides, I think, a few years before that, some hunter found a placard that was like a safety warning off the plane that would have been on the rear aft staircase that he jumped off of.
Yeah.
So they found that, but that was it. And
Yeah, you're talking 8 or 9 years has gone by
yeah,
before really anything significant. And the FBI confirms that these are bills from the ransom. So, that was a
pretty
big
huge
discovery. And I think what's important is that it's found just about 20 miles away from Ariel, Washington, which is where they had first calculated
the original jump.
the original jump.
Okay.
I think one thing I want to say, Gibbs, before we, get to the suspects, is I think from the very beginning, the FBI had speculated that there's no way that this man could have survived the jump. And part of that was the wilderness. Part of that was his equipment wasn't, what you would deem ideal. The conditions were terrible.
Right.
There was even talk about, could he have even gotten his chute to open at that wind speed, that initial blast of him jumping out. And then, I think they were thinking, even if everything went perfectly and the guy was able to land, the area where he would have landed would have been really tough to survive.
Very rough terrain.
Because by all accounts, he had nothing with him.
No.
Right? He didn't have a big supply of food, or he didn't have, as far as we know.
And I did see an interview with a survivalist that trained in that area, and he trained reservists and things like that. And he even said it would be really tough if you don't have like you said, if you don't have the right equipment to live in that harsh environment. And we know when he jumped, he didn't have anything like that.
Right.
So unless he landed exactly where he wanted,
or he had a secondary accomplice,
true,
that was at and I don't even think he could have landed in a predetermined spot.
Yeah, it's not like today where you have GPS.
Wait, there was no cell phones.
No, so
how would you even call somebody and say, "Oh, I landed here"?
I mean,
and how would he even know where here is?
And I don't know how they could pre-plan it. Like so many, I'm gonna say clicks.
Yeah,
he doesn't know when he's up in the air like that. He can count in his head, knowing how fast they're going, but still, it's not going to be spot on.
I think he'd have no idea.
Yeah,
but there again, I mean, that's part of the mystery. This mystery goes on and on and on, and eventually, the FBI in 2016, they announced that they're suspending the investigation. So really, they investigated it for, 45 years.
Which was because I actually saw when that happened. I actually saw the broadcast of that on World News.
Mm-hmm.
I saw it live when the FBI director for that location came out and said because it was one of the first times they ever did anything like this. Because if you would have seen the initial FBI interview, they said that they would never suspend it.
Yeah, I did see that.
Right.
They said that they would go, I don't know if they said ends of the earth, but they said that they would look
Yeah.
for as long as it took to find him.
Yeah. And this time they said it would take something extremely detailed, special for them to go back into it again.
Right. Well, one thing you have to think about, 45 years, right? 46 now, I guess, maybe. But they're saying that he was in his
40s.
30s, 40s.
Yeah. Chances of him even being alive.
Even being alive now are remote. But so, I mean, one thing that's interesting, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because, like I said, we've got to get to the suspects. But what happened with DB Cooper inspired a bunch of copycat hijackings,
Yeah.
which I thought was, really interesting. There was, a number of them that happened after DB Cooper. Probably the most famous, and because this guy is going to be one of our suspects, is Richard McCoy. He was an former Army Green Beret. He hijacked a United Airlines 727, same exact type of plane, and that was in Denver. He redirected it to San Francisco, and then he bailed out over Utah with $500,000.
Wow.
So he basically did the same thing, right? He landed, got his ransom money, got back up in the air, and jumped out. And he landed safely, but was arrested 2 days later. Now we'll get into him more when we talk about the suspects, but
Sure.
He is probably, from what I saw, one of the people he's one of the top two.
Okay.
That most people think
Believe that it was him.
could have been DB Cooper.
Okay.
And, in all, I think there was about 15
Yeah, there's a lot.
of these copycat hijackings in 1972. This was not since DB Cooper. This was in the year after he did what he did. Now, I think we said in the very beginning that throughout the years, there have been over 1,000 serious suspects, what the FBI would term serious suspects. That's a lot of people.
It is a lot of people.
Now, with that, you also have a lot of people that are seeking notoriety. You've had a lot of people that have claimed on their deathbed that they were DB Cooper
Right.
for one reason or another.
We'll probably do the same thing.
We might. All right, so let's get right into it. First main suspect, and again, like we said, we can't talk about everybody, but I think these are probably the top suspects or people of interest, right? These are all alleged. We're not claiming that any of these people committed a crime or were DB Cooper, but these are by far, if you go through the internet, the top suspects. And this is in no particular order, but the first one is Ted Mayfield. And again, a lot of these guys have a lot of things in common.
A lot of the reasons that they have similar characteristics was the fact that, and I think you're headed that way, a lot of them had special military training because I believe most of these guys just came out of the Vietnam War.
No, I think that's right, because you're going to see a theme as we go through these guys that most of them were Army or some type of specialist.
Yeah, like you just said, the McCoy was, I think you said he was Green Beret.
Yeah.
And you got Rangers and things like
Yeah.
that. So I think we're going to see that.
Almost all of them.
Either from the Vietnam War or maybe, I don't know if they went back as far as the Korean War, but you're going to see that.
Yeah, so Mayfield, not only was he in the Army Special Forces, but he was a pilot. He was a competitive skydiver. He was a skydiving instructor. And he also served some time.
Oh.
So he had a lot of things going against him. His criminal record included armed robbery, some stolen aircraft, which I'm not sure what happened there.
Okay.
In 2010, he was sentenced to 3 years probation for flying with a revoked pilot's license. Yeah, he was an early suspect, according to the FBI. And I guess they were on his radar because he had some kind of dispute at a local airport. And I don't know why, but that put him on their radar. But he was ultimately ruled out, mostly on the fact that he was in touch with the FBI, I think within an hour or two.
What, to give his expert advice?
Yes. So I think it was known that he couldn't have been on the plane and also been, calling the FBI
within an hour or two.
saying, hey, I want to, and basically he was offering his advice or his expertise on skydiving practices to try to help him. Now, Ted Mayfield died in 2015, but like I said, he had been ruled out. Gibby, there was some information on the internet, and I guess some researchers called into question the FBI about whether or not Mayfield could have had time to call.
Okay.
And basically they're stating that he didn't call to offer help. He called to establish an alibi.
Oh, okay. So he was just toying with him.
And I guess what they're saying, and I don't know if I buy it because I don't have all the facts, but they're saying that he could have possibly had time to jump out, get somewhere, find a phone, and call the FBI.
I guess it's plausible.
Plausible, but again, by all accounts, he jumped in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, unless he jumped where he knew where he was going.
That's true.
A rabbit hole.
Rabbit hole. We love rabbit holes. All right, Jack Caufelt. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but that's what I'm going with. He was, listed as a con man. He was an ex-convict. In 1972, Jack begins telling everybody that he's DB Cooper. And basically all he's trying to do is sell his story to Hollywood. He wants somebody to make a movie.
Yeah, sounds like he might be a little crazy.
Yeah. He claimed that he landed near Mount Hood, which is in Washington, and it's about 50 miles from Ariel. He injured himself and lost all of the ransom money in the process. Now, the one thing about him, even though it sounds like he was just trying to get some money, and this is one thing we haven't talked about, but obviously they did a bunch of composite drawings, and I put those up on our Facebook page. You can see them.
Yeah.
But apparently this guy did look a lot like the composite drawings. But if you look at the drawings, I think there's a lot of people, especially maybe back then, that looked like those drawings. But the thing about Jack is in 1971, he would have been 50 some years old. So he was quite a bit older than
what the accounts.
Yeah. All of the accounts that were given by the eyewitnesses. Like everybody else, the FBI reviewed him. They discounted him, basically saying that he was making all this stuff up, and he ended up dying in 75. So
not too many years afterwards.
No, he wasn't around to claim that he was DB Cooper for more than 2 or 3 years. But now we get to Richard Floyd McCoy Jr.
The real McCoy.
The real McCoy.
Yeah.
That's actually the name of the book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. These guys wrote a book about McCoy, and I think it's called DB Cooper, The Real McCoy, I believe. I haven't read it, but we're going to hear a little bit from some of the guys that wrote the book. But let me play one clip. I've got a couple clips on McCoy. Let me play the first one.
The standard of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt, and the evidence that I've disclosed to you would, I think, would be used, and in my view, would have a fair chance of convincing a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that it was McCoy who committed the Cooper hijacking. When the FBI finally caught up with him, he pulled a gun on the FBI agents that were trying to arrest him, and they shot him and killed him. That basically is a short form of the story of DB Cooper. Pardon me, that's the story of Richard McCoy. He fit. He fit perfectly.
So we already kind of talked about his copycat hijacking, which bears a lot of similarities to the D.B. Cooper case. And what you heard there, that was an actual prosecutor who wanted to file charges against McCoy, but obviously they weren't able to because he was killed in a shootout with FBI agents. Now let's hear from these two guys that wrote this book, D.B. Cooper, The Real McCoy. A lot of what they say is very interesting. And obviously for time had to cut this down, but I wanted everybody to hear it.
He was a daredevil, very courageous. He just was a fellow that had no fear. He had demolition training. He was a fixed-wing pilot. He flew helicopters. And he, unusual with most crimes, he had the ability to look you right in the eye and scare you half to death. He had been to Vietnam twice. He was highly decorated. They used aviation flight plans, both of them. There wasn't any way Richard McCoy would have known about that because those had been protected. That kind of evidence in the D.B. Cooper case was protected by the FBI. You see in both cases, Cooper and McCoy, that he used what how would you best describe it? I guess it would be pilot lingo and aft staircase, interphone. In the Cooper case, he had her sit pretty much alongside of him. In the McCoy case, he had her sit in front of him. Much improvement there. Because she couldn't look and turn around and really study him and see him and look at his hand. They both sat in the same seat, and one of them, Cooper, left the string tie, which Tina Mucklow was the stewardess, gave to the FBI and told them that she'd seen D.B. Cooper take the tie off. There was gasoline bought by a fellow driving a Volkswagen with a North Carolina plate assigned to McCoy, okay? And he signed a gas ticket on his credit card, and the FBI laboratory said he wrote the signature, Richard McCoy.
And where was that gas bought?
And that gas was bought at that thrust station, power thrust station, just west of the airport, McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas. Now, the other thing that puts him, there was a phone call made from the Tropicana Collect to McCoy's home at 11:10 or 10:10, that evening, Thanksgiving evening. What is a man that doesn't shoot dice, play blackjack, drink whiskey, chase women, smoke cigarettes, do in Las Vegas, Nevada on Thanksgiving? Probably when he got back from Portland, laundered the money there at the Tropicana or maybe a number of hotels, and then got on the phone and called home, and he said, "It's over, I'm on my way." I think that's a logical thing to do. He took his sister-in-law, his wife, and 2 children, and flew them back to Carolina. He paid for that right off to the credit card company. Now we're talking about a sizable amount. He bought new tires for his car. He did a number of things that showed that money was a little easier.
So, I mean, these are the two guys that wrote the book. They got, some pretty interesting things to say. And they talked about the tie with the mother of pearl tie.
Right. Tie
clip. And one of the things that you read online is that McCoy's family is adamant that is his.
Okay.
So, I mean,
it's like a family heirloom.
Yeah, I don't know. They say it's his for sure. And, but the FBI, right, they do not consider him a suspect.
I don't know.
Mostly because they think there are significant mismatches in age and description.
Okay.
But like we talk about rabbit holes.
Right.
This is one that you could spend
a
long time going down all the rabbit holes. And we went down a bunch of them. A lot of the ones I went down, you find a lot of people that are adamant.
Right.
That they think
they take a
this
pretty
was
firm
the guy.
stance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially with this guy. I mean, what a badass too, Green Beret.
Yeah.
But
Well,
and he got 500,000 on the second time.
Yeah.
If it was the second time,
Right.
So, I mean, gosh, 500,000 back then be 2.9 million today. What kind of money? What
Man,
was he
are
doing
you,
with all that
what
stuff?
Are you, Rain Man?
I am.
It's like a math wizard over there.
Rain Man.
So anyway, McCoy is pretty high on the list of most people. The next guy I would talk about is a guy named Robert Rackstraw. Again, he was a retired pilot, was in the Army on a helicopter crew. It was in Vietnam, like you talked about. And he came to the attention of the D.B. Cooper task force later on. So he wasn't an immediate suspect or person of interest, but in a weird way, the guy was arrested in Iran and deported to the U.S. I think he had fled to Iran because he was facing several different charges.
Yeah.
But for different things, bad checks, possessing explosives. There was a whole list of stuff, and he was convicted, but released on bail not that long after. And this guy attempted to fake his own death in a rented plane over Monterey, and he had this false Mayday call, and I think he was telling the air traffic control that he was going to bail out. So one of the things that investigators note about Rackstraw is that he really does have a lot of physical resemblance to Cooper.
To those the sketches that the police did of him?
The composites.
Yeah.
Back then, now he was only 28 at the time, but I don't think that would rule him out.
No, because, I mean, they said 30 to 40 and
28.
I mean,
and a lot of times those ages, I'm horrible with ages.
I am too.
Trying to figure out how old people
I mean,
are.
looking at you, I would say, 60.
Yeah, at least. But, this guy had military parachute training. He did have a criminal record. Yeah, so he had a lot of stuff going against him.
Right.
Again, he was eliminated as a suspect as early as 1979, really just because they couldn't find any direct evidence. So I don't know if he was eliminated
Just
as much as
put on the back shelf.
they just couldn't find anything against him.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting about Rackstraw, and there are a lot of people that like him for Cooper as well, because last year the History Channel did hit a big thing on him.
Yes.
And they had a guy like track him down, and I got just a little clip of the guy asking him some questions.
Are you the person who boarded a flight
What did I just tell you?
on November 24th, 1971, identifying yourself as Dan Cooper?
Maybe
Did you
I didn't.
hijack the plane when it was coming out of Seattle toward Reno? Did you
Maybe
jump
I
out?
wasn't clear, Jim. Maybe I wasn't clear. Don't
Are you
play.
that
Don't
person?
don't try and play
Are
Junior
you,
Dan
are
Rather.
you D.B. Cooper? Did you board a Northwest Orient flight on November 24th, 1971?
What difference does it make?
As a
Jim?
name Dan Cooper, because if you're D.B. Cooper, the world would want to know your story.
Sure they would. So would the FBI and the secret indictment and Washington,
Bob,
D.C.
you're a folk hero. You're
Oh,
a folk
no,
hero.
come
Nobody
on.
cares. Did you board that Northwest flight and hijack it for
I've never been on a
$200,000?
Northwest flight.
Why are you so evasive about what should be a simple thing to say
Because
no?
you guys make such a big deal out of it.
And I saw that interview.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. And he was definitely turned off by them constantly following him around. I want to say he owned like a junkyard or something like that. That's where he was at, and it was scrapyard.
Yeah, well, wouldn't you be too if you
Sure.
if you
You're
weren't
like,
D.B. Cooper and you'd been
Yeah.
cleared by the FBI?
let it
and-
go, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now it's 2016 and they're coming around
Yeah.
saying, "Hey, are you D.B. Cooper?" So yeah, I could see where, if he isn't, and at this point, I don't know who would be, or
Yeah.
we're not here to say who is and who isn't, but I'd be pissed too. I'd be
Sure.
surly.
Yeah.
So let's go through a couple more. There was a guy named Dwayne Weber.
Another veteran.
Yep. Another. Now this guy was I read he was a World War II veteran,
So he's a little bit older.
and which to me would probably put him out of the running just on that. But
Yeah.
you know, he died in 1995, and I guess what's interesting about him is he told his wife that he said, "I am Dan Cooper," and here we go with like almost like a deathbed confession. The problem is she didn't know what the hell he was talking about. That name Dan Cooper didn't mean anything to her, and it wasn't till later that his wife realized that Dan Cooper was the name that D.B. Cooper used when he bought the ticket.
Yes.
So, you know, kind of interesting. Now, why this guy would say he's Dan Cooper, I don't know.
Unless he was fascinated with it and
Yeah.
on his deathbed, you know, who knows?
Yeah. But so apparently his wife didn't know anything much about D.B. Cooper, but she would go on to become like this, like immersed in it, trying to figure out if her husband really was D.B. Cooper. But what she discovers along the way is that he actually had a second identity. Her real husband had a second identity by the name of John C. Collins. And she says that as she got into the discovery, she found out that there was a man by the name of John C. Collins that registered at a Portland airport motel the night before the skyjacking and had been a subject of the Cooper investigation.
Okay.
So,
wow,
it's interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know what to make of it.
That's the
But
that's
all
the
of it's
problem.
interesting, right?
Yeah, and that's the problem, right? There's each one has some legit reasons that you would think that they would be or could be,
And then almost all of them have something that kind of
that also takes you off of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. The FBI eliminated this guy. Now, one of the reasons is because they did. I don't know if we mentioned this or not, but they found fingerprints on the plane.
Yeah, and we did.
I forget the number, but it was like
64 prints
Yeah.
or something like that.
And none of his fingerprints matched. Now, again, that doesn't mean anything.
No.
Because
He
that
could-
doesn't mean that any of the fingerprints they found on the plane were of D.B. Cooper.
Yeah.
You know,
That doesn't
it's
mean
not 100% sure.
No, it could have not touched anything. Who knows?
I don't know.
But far as suspects, I think the next one I think you're going to talk about is just interesting because of our true crime background, right? I think this.
Yeah, so you got to be talking about John List.
Yeah.
And John List is a guy that we're going to cover on True Crime All the Time.
Right.
Because, I mean, this guy killed his wife, he killed his 3 children, and he killed his mother.
Yeah.
15 days before the hijacking. He took $200,000 from his mother's bank account. The only reason that he came up really on the radar is the timing, and that $200,000 was kind of a weird number.
Yeah.
Because it was the same number. But he was captured in 1989, and he admitted to murdering his whole family, but he denied any involvement in the Cooper hijacking. So I assume if you're okay with admitting
Yes.
murdering 5 people.
Why wouldn't you take the...
Yeah.
So he was on the run for 18 years, got caught, and
Yes.
said, it wasn't me.
Yeah. But we're going to cover him because he's an interesting character. But I don't think there's really much there. William Gossett is a guy that comes up a lot.
Yeah. Another vet.
Another vet, was in Korea and Vietnam, you know, and like some of the other ones, he had advanced jump training. He also had wilderness survival. And so, you know, that really puts him on the radar as well. Now, this guy was known to have been obsessed with the D.B. Cooper. He collected, you know, every bit of news and articles that he could find. Now, later in life, it's said that he told his sons and some other friends that he was D.B. Cooper. There are a lot of people online, like we said, that think he could be. He had a lot of the characteristics. He was 41 years old at that point in time. He looked a lot like the composite. He was a smoker, which we didn't talk about, but D.B. Cooper was a smoker.
Well, because we said in the beginning he lit up.
Oh, did we?
Yeah, and then he ordered a bourbon and Coke.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
So, but think about it back then. Most people smoked.
Oh,
back then.
Oh, yeah.
That was, and especially if they came out of the military,
right.
They definitely smoked.
Yeah, I mean, some of the things about him that apparently one of his sons said that the guy was a gambler who never had any money.
Yeah.
He gambled away all of his money. And then just before Christmas in 1971, he shows up with a whole bunch of cash.
Yeah.
So
either he hit it big,
yeah,
or he was D.B. Cooper.
Right. Just the weirdest part about him is in 1988, he changed his name to Wolfgang and became a Catholic priest.
Okay. Wow.
I don't know.
Well, maybe he was just trying to clean his soul.
Yeah, I don't know what he is. I mean, according to the FBI, there's no direct evidence. I mean, obviously, there's no direct evidence implicating any of these people. No. I don't know why I keep saying it, because if they had it,
they'd be arrested.
They would have charged them or done something.
Right.
And, yeah. But, according to them, there's not even a shred or even a link or anything. So I guess there's two more that we got to get to. First one is Kenneth Christensen. And, again, Army, trained as a paratrooper, had made a lot of jumps in his life. The interesting part about Christensen and why he gets a lot of attention is after the Army, he actually worked for Northwest Orient.
Oh, he did.
Which is
the airline.
The airline. And that's why he was a mechanic. Then he became a flight attendant and then a purser. And he was based in Seattle.
Okay.
He was 45 years old at the time. A little bit shorter and thinner than, but I don't put a lot of stock into that. He did smoke. And by all accounts, he had a real fondness for bourbon. The other thing is he was left-handed. Yeah. And there has been some evidence that...
what will lead you to think that D.B. Cooper was too?
Yeah, I think the tie clip that we keep talking about was put on from the left side. And that makes a lot of people think that D.B. Cooper was left-handed. Probably the biggest thing about Christensen is that Florence Schaffner, who, if you remember, she's the one that got the note.
Right.
She's the flight attendant. She said that his pictures fit her memory of the hijacker more closely than any of the other ones that she'd seen.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So for what it's worth.
I think the other fact that was kind of compelling was the fact that he bought a house and paid cash for it right after the hijack as well.
Yes.
I think that's a little, but then again, we don't know how much this house was and how much cash. So, but it's still interesting that, he had enough money to pay cash.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of things on him, and that's why he draws a lot of interest as well. Like McCoy. I think you got McCoy. You've got Christensen.
Well, and Christensen also, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I read that upon his death, they found over $200,000 in bank accounts.
Yes.
And some other valuable stuff.
Yeah,
so
gold,
again, I don't know.
Some gold, some rare stamps, I guess. And
could he have been?
Well, and the other interesting thing they found, Gibbs, is apparently they found this folder, and it had a whole bunch of Northwest Orient news clippings dating all the way back to the 50s. So for some reason, while he worked there, he had clipped out these newspaper articles and he kept them. Anything on Northwest Orient. Well, the clippings they go all the way up to the hijacking, and then there's not another one in there.
So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
It's like he was keeping a scrapbook, but then he got the 200,000, didn't need to do it anymore.
Yeah, and apparently he continued to work for the airline after the hijacking.
So that's, I don't know, another rabbit hole.
Right. So if you believe everything you read on the internet, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But again, it's like a broken record. The FBI says that he's not a suspect, can't be considered a suspect, mainly due to, now see, they're saying he doesn't match the physical descriptions.
But yet the flight attendant that originally got the first note says he looks more like D.B. Cooper than anybody.
Yeah,
she's
but
seen
I think they're saying he was too short.
Too short.
He was.
Yeah, but we know that. I mean,
I think that's suspect.
yeah.
Also, they're saying, his level of skydiving expertise was actually above what they think their suspect. And I don't know where. There's a couple of people that they say this about, that they're ruling them out because they think they had too much skydiving experience.
That doesn't make sense to me.
It doesn't make sense.
It'd be the other
at
way
all.
that would make sense to me.
You would think it would be
they
the
were
other
a
way.
novice or something, but to say that they have plenty too
right.
much doesn't make sense.
Doesn't make any sense. All right, got to go on. I'm going to go on to this last one, and the guy's actual name is Cooper, so that's kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Lynn Doyle Cooper, L.D. Cooper,
Yeah.
is what he went by. And again, he was a Korean War veteran,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't come up as a suspect until much later, like 2011, and he was really kind of outed by his niece, who would have been around like 8 years old at the time. And I've got a clip that I'm going to play of her, but well, let's just play it because she has a lot to say.
I'm certain he was my uncle, Lynn Doyle Cooper. My father made a comment about his long-lost brother, my uncle LD, and said that he thought he was still alive but hiding from the FBI. And I questioned why he would be hiding. He said, "Don't you remember he hijacked that airplane?" My two uncles, who I only saw at holiday time, were planning something very mischievous. They left to supposedly go turkey hunting, and Thanksgiving morning I was waiting for them to return. My uncle LD was wearing a white t-shirt, and he was bloody and bruised and a mess, and I was horrified. I began to cry, and my other uncle, who was with LD, said, "Marla, just shut up and go get your dad." He had the Dan Cooper comic books thumbtacked to the wall next to his bed. I think he idolized the guy and conjured this crazy scheme in his mind.
I 8 years old. My memory's not great. I wouldn't be able to tell you what I heard
Yeah.
at 8 years old.
Right.
I don't know.
I don't know what to make of that one.
Yeah.
It's just interesting.
It was interesting. I mean, because it made the world news.
Yep, it did.
And the FBI got involved, but I think case was closed really fast too.
Yep. So, I mean, that's the suspects. Basically the only other thing, Gibbs, that I wanted to talk about is, what this kind of did for airport security. I don't know. It wasn't 9/11-ish, but it did mark the beginning of where all airlines were required to search passengers and their bags. I mean, before that, you could just walk on. There was really no searching.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where a lot of that came out of this.
I also like the fact that, because our true crime murder fans out there, I found it interesting that Earl Cossey, is that how you say it? The guy that ran the parachute jumping school that they got the parachutes from, in 2013, he was found dead in his home. It was ruled a homicide. And then, of course, you got the conspiracy theory people out there thinking that somehow it was related to the D.B. Cooper case. But again, I just found it interesting,
how it all kind of ties. But yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, weird. I think weird coincidence that the guy that supplied the parachutes ended up being killed. Now, this is 2013.
2013.
If you'd have said 73,
Then you'd be like, maybe
74,
Yeah,
then you would pique my interest maybe a little more, but
yeah, 40 years.
why
later.
wait 40 years to silence somebody? Yeah,
Right.
I don't get it. But anyway, I mean, that's the case of DB Cooper. Like you said, there are a ton more suspects. We could have talked for however many more hours, but you just can't fit it all in
No.
to an episode. So for Mike,
And Gibby.
this is True Crime All the Time Unsolved. Stay safe and keep your own time ticking.